Hey everyone, James again here from Honest Dad, and I'm doing this in my bed because I work very long hours and I chase tiny children around all day, so I often don't have time for a cool background. But I want to take some time to talk about the book of Enoch, which is an apocryphal gospel, and just the wild things that are going on in it, specifically regarding giants and giant humans. So I just want to set the table here and say that the Book of Enoch is considered heretical or apocryphal by most Christian denominations, as well as most sects of Judaism. There are a few notable exceptions. There are several hyper-Orthodox. Basically, it's an Orthodox offshoot of Orthodox Judaism. And they actually believe that the Book of Enoch is canon. Also, more specifically, in the Orthodox faith, the Oriental Orthodox Church, the Eritrean Church, as well as the Ethiopian Church, were parts of Ethiopian Orthodoxy, because there's several Ethiopian churches. But several of the Ethiopian churches do indeed accept the Book of Enoch as a accepted book of the Bible, aka is something that happened. There are also a few Protestant denominations, such as Primitive Baptists, that accept the Book of Enoch. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints borrows from the Book of Enoch, especially in the Book of Moses, as well as a few other parts in the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants as well. It's not completely included in any of their canon, though, but they do believe that some of it is canon. And that's pretty much it. Most every Christian denomination out there, most denominations think the Book of Enoch is heretical and is not something that's true. Now, whenever we talk about biblical sources or parts of the Bible, there's two important things that you want to always remember. Number one, which is, do you believe in divine transcription? And if so, how much? And two, how much do you personally believe through God and in your heart? How much do you personally believe that being able to read the entirety of a holy source is important in your salvation? And the first one, I'm not going to go into too much. I'm not going to get into the divine transcription debate. If something is divinely transcribed, it's divinely transcribed, meaning that it exists in the state that God wants it to exist. But the interesting thing about the divine transcription argument is when you get to the things like the Book of Enoch, is if it's divinely transcribed, right, then why is it super apocryphal with most of the faith traditions? AKA, why would God allow a book of the Bible to essentially be left out? Except it's not left out, because some Christian denominations, like the Ethiopian Orthodox people, they accept it. So again, it's the divine transcription argument. I'm not going to get into that too much in that video. That's really a whole other video entirely. And of course, there's levels of divine transcription, and there's interpretation, and there's interpretation on top of interpretation. And the second part to me is more salient, because it's more of a philosophical theology question. And that's basically saying that, okay, if you are a believer in said religion, so if you are a Christian and you believe in Christianity, how important is it for you to actually read the Bible or read the totality of God's word? Now, there are Protestant ministers and quite a few evangelical Protestants that will pound their chest and say it's absolutely essential. You should be reading the Bible all the time. There are some Catholics that do it. Certainly a lot of more evangelical Catholics believe that. Not so many Orthodox people, because in the Orthodox tradition, it's the priest that reads it to you, not you reading it. And that brings up the interesting fork in my philosophical argument. If you look at human history and the history of Christianity, the vast majority of Christians, probably 8% of them, historically, could not read, because 98% of the human population could not read before the modern era, so the last 150 years. Now, that's at least 1,800 years of Christians believing in God, including in the immediate aftermath of Jesus' ministry and the early church, when the thing was pretty fresh. So what, if, so it's like, what's going on with those people? If reading the Bible and understanding all the books of the Bible is extremely important and essential to your faith, then what do we say about all the millions and tens of millions of people that couldn't read the Bible because they couldn't read? So that's a more, like I said, it's a more salient and more interesting argument to get into that. It's also, then you can then, by just logically, you can then connect that argument to, well, lost books. So if it's not 100% important to read the actual main Bible, is it 100% important to read any of the books that are not included into the Bible, right? Or, is it essential to read all these things, or does God speak to you in other ways? Does God connect to you in other ways, like through music, like through friendship, like through nature? So again, that's something to debate. I'm gonna side pretty squarely on the latter, not the former. I'm not saying that reading the Bible and other works is not important. It's definitely important, but you need to take it with a grain of salt. And just because you read these sources, you do not necessarily know God, and you do not necessarily know God's heart. So just, again, take it with a grain of salt. Just because you're well read in the Bible does not mean you know what the H you're talking about. And it certainly does not mean you know God's heart, because there's been millions of people that have known God and known him well and never read the Bible because they couldn't. Now, when we get into the actual book of Enoch, this is a little bit more complicated. It's quite a long book. Like, if you just listen to it on a book on tape, it's about 4.5 hours or even 5 hours, depending on how fast the guy reading it or the lady reading it reads it. I'm going to cover, in the rest of this video, the first part of the book of Enoch, which deals quite heavily with the Nephilim and with fallen angels. So the book of Enoch starts off with Enoch basically having a series of conversations with Uriel, who's the head of the archangels. Again, archangels are not the highest ranks of angels, and it's important to understand that. That's basically the Oraphim and the Seraphim. But Enoch is sitting there and he's talking to Uriel, and Uriel is essentially telling him the story of why the earth is so rotten. And what Uriel essentially tells him, which is then apparently backed up by Enoch's own personal observations, is that there were about 200 angels that God gave the task of watching over earth, and they were called the Watchers. And these Watchers just were supposed to sit there and watch earth and occasionally help out here or there, but they really weren't supposed to directly intervene. Now, this is after the War of Heaven, so these are all angel loyalists that sided with God in the War of Heaven, right? So they're not demons, nothing like that. And one day, their leader decides to start basically coming down to earth and having sexual relations with human women. And they then swear this pact amongst all the angels of these 200, saying that if one of them does this, they will all do that, because they're all basically brother angels, and they know that if God finds out about this, or if he disapproves of it, because they know he's going to find out about it, but if he disapproves of it, that he's going to punish the person that did it, so they want to all share that punishment. So it's kind of like a communal punishment thing. This is a concept which is probably pretty foreign to most humans, but it's not entirely philosophically unsound, the idea of sharing other people's burdens so they don't suffer it alone. There's a bit of grace in that. So anyway, this group of angels, they come down. The book lists about 20 of them, including Azazel, Seraph, a few others. There's a Methuselah angel as well. They come down to earth and they start having sexual relations with human women, which initially God does not seem to oppose, and everything is going along fine. But then they decide to procreate with human women. And this is something that God specifically forbade them to do and told them. And so this is the interesting part of the story, again, when it comes to the human giants, is that these are angels, again, that sided with God against Lucifer. So they're loyalists. And they've actually spoken to God or had their messages conveyed to God, but they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God is real. And yet they still decide to betray him or to go against his word. It's a softer betrayal than what the demons do, but they still decide to go against God's word because they want to essentially have children with human women. Right away, this adds an interesting flavor into Christian theology because it indicates that all angels are male and all angels have reproductive organs in the case of this. So, because they have children with the human women. This is pretty important and is a big reason that the book of Enoch may have been excluded from the Bible, because it completely turns on the head the depiction of angels in other parts of the Bible, where they are depicted as ephemeral, kind of non-sexual creatures that do not have the equipment to have sexual intercourse and are probably a mixture of different genders. So the Enoch completely changes the narrative. They're all men. They can have sex. They have sexual organs. So that's an important kind of thing in the book of Enoch. And as I go over the book of Enoch in like these 2-3 videos, you're going to see this a lot, that the book of Enoch completely radically changes a lot of Christian and Jewish theology, and it does it in a very fundamental way, based on what Enoch says. So after this little part of the angels coming down to earth to copulate with human women, Enoch and Methuselah and some other humans observe this, and they're like, this is not good, and they basically pray to God, but they mainly go visit Uriel, Michael, and Gabriel, who are kind of hanging out on the earth as well, helping out humans a little bit and watching these angels that have come down to earth, and they essentially say, what's going to happen with this? Is this good or bad? And then the rest of the book is, and the angels kind of give this, cryptic non-answer, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. But as the story progresses, it's evident that it's very bad. And so what happens is that when the angels have babies with human women, the human women give birth to the Nephilim. Now, the Nephilim are something that are mentioned one time in the book of Genesis, and it's usually in either a sentence or a paragraph, depending on what translation you have. Now, the Catholic Church has actually recently written out the Nephilim, as have numerous other Christian denominations, because people are just getting confused in them. And I don't know verbatim, but essentially in most versions of the Bible, in Genesis, it says that in the elder days, that the sons of God, aka angels, saw that human women were beautiful, and they laid with them, and the Nephilim were born, and that these were men of great renown. And that's it. It doesn't talk about what do these people do, why they have great renown, what does this mean. It's really a very small reference. But it's important because the book of Enoch talks about the Nephilim extensively for pages and pages and pages. And the word Nephilim in the same context exists in the accepted version of the Bible. So this actually gives quite a bit of credence and literary value to the book of Enoch, because if the book of Enoch was the only book, apocryphal gospel, that talked about Nephilim and angels having babies with human women, it'd be a lot easier to dismiss it. But in this case, it aligns a little bit with the Bible, and it's also going to align with the Bible quite heavily in terms of naming angels. It gets most of that right. And then later on, with some theological stuff, its descriptions of heaven and hell are pretty spot on. And we'll get to what happens with that, because Enoch is actually transported to heaven and taken through hell with Uriel. So anyway, the angels have babies with the human women, and the human women give birth to Nephilim. Nephilim end up being these 8 to 10 feet long, 8 to 10 feet tall, essentially giants. And they are very strong. They inherit the angelic attributes of intellect and things like that. But also, very crucially, they inherit the angelic, basically the transubstantiated, non-corporeal aspects of an angel. So they have a human physical body, but then they also have a soul that's non-corporeal, meaning they essentially exist on two separate planes at the same time. This gives them a massive advantage over early humans, who are all basically probably hunters and gatherers anyway at this time. And they build a series of kingdoms in the Near East, the Black Sea area, Turkey, etc., where the Nephilim essentially kind of dominate mankind. There seems to be this period where the Nephilim coexist fairly well with humans, but this quickly runs out. It sounds like the Nephilim, again according to the Book of Enoch, consume lots of resources. Also around this time, a number of the angels, the Watchers, decide to start teaching humans things. Azazel is mentioned constantly because he essentially teaches humans war. There's other angels that teach humans less aggressive things. For example, Seraph supposedly teaches humans a lot about like astronomy and science and things like that, more useful tools. But the Nephilim get pretty uppity. So eventually what happens is all of the men that the Nephilim kill make it to heaven, and they cry out to God. And basically they cry out to lower ranks of angels that this is kind of literally unfair, that they were basically pitted against these like 8-foot tall, semi non-corporeal entities with superior intellect and amazing strength. The angels are running up the flagpole, and the god is pissed. Now, again, this is another important fork I want to talk about, because like other parts of the Bible, this indicates that there's a strict hierarchy of angels, that even within angels, not every angel can even talk to God. So like if you're a lower ranked angel, you can't just like fly up to God and be like, hey, dude, God up me a solution to my problem. You have to basically report it up the chain of command to the next rank of angels, to the next rank of angels, eventually all the way to the Oraphim, who are the ones that, really the only ones that can talk to God, other than select archangels like Michael and Gabriel and Uriel, that are given specific tasks by God. So anyway, the message makes it up to the big man, and he decides, yeah, this is not right. This is bad news. This is bad news bunnies. We need to get rid of these Nephilim. They're kind of ruining this kind of experiment that we get going on Earth. So he gives orders to Uriel, Gabriel, and Michael, as well as a couple of other angels. Another angel called Porimel or something like that. And they are basically told to go to Earth and essentially wipe out the Nephilim, primarily by tricking the Nephilim into fighting each other. But this happens over a long period of time, a couple hundred years. The angels come down, and with the assistance of righteous men, essentially they wipe out all the Nephilim, and they kind of corner a lot of the angels in their castles or their towns or wherever they're hanging out. At this point, God basically cuts this deal with these angels, and some of the ones like Methuselah and Seraph are essentially allowed to return to heaven, but the ones that really led humanity astray, like Azazel, are essentially bound in the earth. And it doesn't really specifically talk about this as a place, but it's just they're bound in some desert on the earth, whether this is a metaphorical spiritual desert or a non-corporeal plane. I don't know. But that's what the source says, is that they basically, that these angels are bound in the earth. They are not sent to hell, crucially, because the source says that when the final judgment comes, that they're going to be judged, and then they'll be sent to hell. But for the essentially the entire duration of humanity, they are basically bound on the earth and forced to watch all the events of humanity unfold, but not participate in them. At this point, then the earth is super scarred, and the good angels, are basically told to help humanity rebuild, which humanity does. But then humanity actually decides to embrace the more wicked nature of what the Nephilim taught them and what the Watchers taught them. And so this is what leads to Noah's flood. That basically the humans have now, before they were being led astray, so God cuts them some slack, but now they are choosing, basically wickedness of their own volition. So God decides they need to be wiped out, except for Noah and his family, etc. Now, again, at this time, it's really important to just harp on this, and I'm going to do a whole nother video on Noah. The Noah flood was certainly a regional flood, probably in the lower part of the Black Sea and the northern part of Turkey, likely when the Mediterranean basically broke through the isthmus that's in between Anatolia and Europe and flooded the Black Sea, which used to be a much smaller sea. And they found an ancient coastline, they found ruined cities in there and everything like that. It is still technically a global flood if you consider, for biblical reasons, if you consider the following fact. Prior to the modern era, no one had a clue what the globe of the earth looked like. Before the age of exploration, no one had a clue what their little continent looked like. And prior to really the Roman period, no one knew even what their own continent looked like. When you get back this far in history, the people, including the writers who are writing about that time, are going to conceive about their little community, when what they can see over the horizon, as the world. And they're going to write it down as the world. So they have no conception that if you're living in this little town in the Black Sea, 7,000 years ago or 15,000 years ago or whatever, they have no conception that there's an Antarctica and there's a South America and a North America. There's no way they could. They also have no conception of a top-down view like we have, since we have satellites. Everything is going to be a lateral view of the universe. So when they say world, when they say God floods the world, what they mean is their world, which is probably only a couple hundred square miles, which can definitely flood, especially if an entire ocean is dumping into the Black Sea. So again, I every time I have a chance to say that, I just have to say it. But anywho, this is all set for a flood. At this point, Enoch is super old, and he's proven himself as essentially the most worthy human that's yet to come. And again, if the Enoch is canon, he would be the most worthy human, to be honest. He'd even be above Noah and Moses and Abraham, because he is essentially allowed to not die and just transported to heaven, and he's allowed to see heaven and hell completely as well. He's also allowed to see the entire span of human history through the perspective of heaven. And that's a mind-boggling gift. So again, that's another huge theological fork in the book of Enoch, because it purports Enoch would be probably the greatest biblical hero, at least in the Old Testament. But when he's super old, Uriel basically takes him on this tour of heaven and hell. Heaven is really great. Hell doesn't look so good, but this time there's not really many people in it. And again, here's another crucial fork. According to the book of Enoch, Uriel says that hell is for demons, and that it was created for demons and Nephilim. and that there are no humans in hell, but there's a second hell. Essentially, there's a second part of hell that humans are going to chill out in until Judgment Day, when the Messiah, which, again, this is a long time before that, when the Messiah is going to come and settle all accounts. And this is very interesting because there are other apocryphal gospels that confirm this and say that, when Jesus was teaching, he said that, when humans die, they go to this like second hell, not the main one that's for demons, and that they're all essentially just asleep. There are other apocryphal gospels that say that, when Jesus died, he went to the human hell and basically judged everyone there, or didn't, or just visited them. So again, like, another huge theological divide. And, again, we're only, 20% into the Book of Enoch. Like I said, it's nuts what it does to Christian theology, because now it's dividing hell into multiple levels, which is not really a thing in Christian theology. And don't get me started on Dante's Inferno, because that's just made up by a crazy Italian dude. That's not biblical. So he goes through the heaven and hell. Uriel has also been in direct communication with God, and God, tells Enoch, says basically, listen, they're like, the Nephilim are going to get judged, but then the spirit part, the non-corporeal parts of the Nephilim, some of them, we captured, but others are basically going to roam the earth, and they're going to cause like problems for humans. So you need to be aware of this. So it's like ghosts and stuff like that. It also says that the women that basically had babies with these angels and then were given essentially immortality by these angels, are going to become sirens, which, directly taken from Greek mythology. So again, like, that part of it, you're just like, oh, okay. And then the first part, the story of the Nephilim, essentially sums up with the coming of Noah, and Noah being warned by Uriel that, there's this big flood coming, and he needs to get his act together and build this ark to save all the animals, etc. But that's essentially the 360 of the Book of Enoch and the Giants. Summary wise, it's wild. It goes all over the place. It does some interesting things. I did a lot of analysis in the video. I'll do a few minutes here as well. This part of the Book of Enoch, like I said, it completely changes a lot of parts of Christianity. Another thing it changes is the more casual relationship between humans and angels, because throughout it, Uriel is just like talking to Enoch like they're buddies. Like, there's no deference. There's no, crowns of fire. There's no like beams of light being like shine, that blind people or whatever. There's no people being turned to pillars of salt or anything like that by angels. It's just like Uriel's a dude and Enoch's a dude, and they're just having a casual conversation. That's a huge change. Again, earlier I talked about the huge change of Uriel's angels being all men and being able to sexually procreate. The other angelic change is that it purports that there's essentially a second civil war in heaven. There's the main one, and then there's this much smaller one, but arguably more consequential one, where the angels, this group of 200 angels, instead of deciding to make war on God, they decide to just go and F around on earth and cause problems on earth because they find women really attractive. And this is a thing in Orthodox Christianity and some Orthodox Jewish religions, why women are told to cover their hair, because it's to prevent the angels from falling in love with them. This was also something that was really widely believed in the early Roman Empire, or excuse me, the early church in the late Roman Empire. In places like Egypt, women covered their hair like they do today in Muslim countries, because the patriarch said, if you don't, angels are going to fall in love with you and come down and have babies with you, which is right from the book of Enoch. So if you ever wonder why that happens in certain Christian denominations, that's why. That's the origin of it. It's this fear of angels falling in love with human women, because this happened and all these horrible things resulted because the Nephilim were created. The other interesting thing about it is, again, it changes the role of God as less of a, constant, omnipotent, omnipresent entity that has this super intricate plan, to more of a guy that set up the system and is kind of busy with different pots all over, and relies on his subalterns to kind of run it. And then when they make quality arguments or not quality arguments, then he can be swayed. So again, it creates this notion of a swayable God. Maybe it's very meager, but it's definitely in the source. And other than that, hey, 10-foot giants roaming the earth. Like, whoa, that's crazy. So we're going to do more video. I'm going to do more videos on this. Again, this is a very fascinating topic, and I'll do a final theological interpretation of all this and the final video, and whether or not I think it is actually canonical, and whether any of this actually happened and angels got turned on by human women and had sex with them and had babies. All right. Thanks, guys. Good night.